Okay, good afternoon once again. Welcome to our GE2 Purposive Communication lesson. So we'll just go through the course information and somehow go over the discussions here. So for us, somehow I can add a thing or two on the lessons. Okay, so welcome to the course. With the creation of life comes the creation of the human ability to communicate. So communication today, more than ever, has become more riveting and convoluted as we explore our similarities and differences in a multicultural setting. So, where am I? Multicultural world, I mean. So this is why it is very important that you learn to communicate purposefully in a world full of diverse people. Purposive communication means your ability to strategically make use of the multimodal resources and appropriately choose an accurate language register for your desired audience. So, as a whole, purposive communication is not just your ability to deliver your message successfully at that, but it also entails your ability to send your message with purpose, respect, understanding, and acceptance of other people regardless of their culture, age, and gender. So in order for you to be purposeful with your communication, you must describe and understand the nature, the elements, and the functions of verbal and nonverbal communication in various and multicultural contexts, which is the ultimate course outcome of this subject. So the course deals with the nature and communication and how culture and global issues shape communication. So you will also learn to appreciate how communication affects our society in the 21st century. So in this course, you will also learn how to design and present ideas in local and global contexts using different multimedia and multimodal strategies. So you will also realize the importance of designing effective and appropriate communication materials in your future workplace. So with this ability, you will be more equipped in successfully sending your message to the desired audience. So with purposive communication, you will learn to write and present a research or academic paper with the use of appropriate tone, styles, and conventions. So this ability will further equip you as you go higher in the academic ladder of success. So let's begin. So at the first 2 3 weeks of our lessons, obviously we are a bit behind, so we have to double our time in terms of coping up with the lessons. So with the unit learning outcomes, at the end of the unit, you are expected to describe the characteristics, evolution, the process, and elements of communication. Okay, I lost my music. Wait a minute. There. Okay. Then, what happened to my music? Okay. Ah, ha, 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 ha. Wait. For a while. Okay, so our goal here is at the end of the unit, you are expected to describe the characteristics, evolution, process, and elements of communication. Also to articulate the types, the 7 C's, the ethics, the principles in communication, and finally to appreciate communication in multicultural settings. But the big picture and focus here is to describe the characteristics, evolution, process, and elements of communication. So that will be our first discussion for today. So in this section, essential terms relevant to the study of the nature of communication and to demonstrate ULO-a will be operationally defined to establish a common frame of reference as to how the texts work. So you will encounter these items as we go through the study of the nature of communication. So please refer to these definitions in case you will encounter difficulty in understanding some concepts. So how do we define communication? So the meaning and definitions of different meanings of communication. So first, communication is a basic requirement in the success of any individual. So every profession requires communication as a basic key to a professional success. So we can't imagine a profession without involving communication. Even with uh, blue collar jobs, communication is very important. You cannot ask for a hammer and somebody will just give you a saw. So that's going to create a lot of problems in the workplace. Okay, next, communication is also essential of a good and productive society. So basically, there would be no society without communication. Even among bees within their colony, they communicate by the signals that they create by flying. So it's still a form of communication. So the success and failure of a society relies greatly on its people's communication. So without proper communication within an office, for example, or within an organization, it's impossible for them to really thrive within that society. Next, communication also involves the encoding, the sending, and decoding of a message to the desired audience. So, communication is a process by which we assign and convey meaning with a desire to have a common and shared understanding of the message. So, we cannot have a different interpretation of the same message. Now, for example, with a traffic light, it would be chaotic if another person would interpret green as something else or as red as something else. So communication is also a process or it helps you build connections with other people from different places with different beliefs, customs, and cultures. So this is a time where the earth has become smaller, the world has become smaller because of the internet and because of the people's ability to adjust and communicate with other cultures in the world. Okay, communication also allows you to have better understanding of the people around you. You would understand why they behave in such a way or why do they do things that way. Communication also enables you to inform, persuade, and motivate the people around you. And somehow you can influence them and ask them to do things. Okay, so how did communication evolve? So evolution of communication is the record of the past events on how communication started or evolved into what it is as of the present. So communication grows. There's no such thing as a stagnant communication between people. Number three, characteristics of communication explains the distinct qualities and attributes of communication, which a person must know for the success of the communication process. And when you talk about process of communication, it is the series of steps that serves as not servers that serves as a guide that will lead to common understanding between the sender and the receiver. When you say elements of communication, these are the components that the sender and the receiver consider in the exchange of ideas. So I hope these terms are well understood before we proceed to the essential knowledge section. I hope we are facing each other like in a face-to-face classroom situation so that I can check if you had understood the lesson. But whenever you have questions, anyway, you can still communicate with me in a group chat and open up things or ask questions there. Okay, now for the essential knowledge. Who would like to read? Just kidding. Okay, so to perform the aforesaid big picture or the ULO, for the first 3 weeks of the course, you need to fully understand the following essential knowledge that will be laid down in the succeeding pages. Please note that you are not limited to refer to these resources exclusively. Thus, you are expected to utilize other books, research articles, and other resources that are available in the university's library or eBrary search or proquest.com or other sources of information you can find in the internet. I know you are resourceful enough to find these things. Okay, so number one, the characteristics of communication. What comes to mind when you say characteristics of communication. Okay, communication is a process of exchanging ideas, information, emotions, and even other forms of messages from one person to another. It is deemed necessary in one's success in life. And here are a few among many characteristics of communication. Number one, communication is the bloodline of the society. So, in the absence of communication, there will be no society. So, all forms of society has communication. Even the kingdom of animals have their own, as I have mentioned earlier about the bees. So, which are necessary in their survival. Even though they can't speak, but still, they have their ways of communicating with each other. In all of our undertakings, communication is vital. That's according to Tendero, Antonio Nora, etc. Okay, communication is also basic to success. So proper communication makes business a success. The ability to say what you feel, or express your ideas, persuade others to believe in you, and convince them to react or respond to you are all factors to a successful career. Number three, communication allows you to create network and other build stronger relationships. So your ability to communicate allows you to make friends, right? Do you remember that? To extend your network of circle of people around you and to build relationships with people of different places, even within the family. That's how relationships are built by strong communication between its members. So without communication between a father and a daughter, without the husband and the wife, this basic structure of community of the society will crumble. So let's learn to communicate with each other. What else? Number four, communication is everywhere. So communication is constant, which means it is everywhere. Wherever you go, whatever you do, whoever you are with, communication will always be present. So the moment you wake up and think of what breakfast to eat, or a simple thought of planning in your day, is a form of communication within the self. So at the very least, smiling at someone is already a form of sending a message. Thus, it is a form of communication. So communication is not just, as later it will be explained, it's not just made up of simple words or phrases. It also involves nonverbal elements. Okay, so communication is also a two-way process. Now, one of the very nature of communication is the requirement of a sender and a receiver. So since one can communicate within the self, we call it interpersonal communication, or a communication may not necessarily require two individuals. It only needs a sender and a receiver, so along with its other elements for the communication to process. Okay, so even a simple reading a text like a pocketbook. So it's not just the author communicating to you. You can also uh, respond to what you have read by asking questions or by reflecting on the thought. That's still considered part of communication. That's under intrapersonal communication. And number six, communication is complex. So that communication is not easy with its many components and considerations. In communicating, you have to consider your target audience interests, the culture, the beliefs, the practices, etc. So many things. There are also other things that you have to consider, such as the grammar, the medium, and the other means of communicating with your message, which makes the entire communication process not as easy, as it sounds. It's like, for example, when you are um, into a job interview, you cannot just have a prepared, memorized sets of answers for particular questions. No, you have to really listen well and communicate, and even try to understand what the interviewer is trying to communicate or looking for. So, or whenever you are in a courting stage, you have to really understand the other person's tendencies, interests, things that could turn him or her off or on. So that is, communication is really very complex. A simple, even non-communication is still a form of communication. When you ignore somebody who is talking to you, that communicates something. That could possibly mean that you're not as important to him, or your opinions don't matter. So it's still a form of communication. So number 7, communication is irreversible. So there's a need for you to be extra careful with your communication skills, since this is only done once. It cannot be repeated and cannot be taken back. Once the communication process has occurred, it has to be noted that your words and their meaning may have varied interpretations from your target audience. Okay, so that is why we have this netiquette in social media, that think before you click, because sometimes when you had already clicked send or post, sometimes you can take it back anymore, especially if a considerable amount of time has already lapsed. And once somebody has made a screenshot of it or recorded the video you had sent, it would be quite a task to retrieve or to delete those things, like in the cases of scandals or simply offensive words that you had sent to somebody, and the person on the other side was able to take a screenshot of it, and that becomes an evidence of malice or intention to hurt people, and cases could be filed against you for doing that. So you have to be extra careful. Sometimes even clicking like on a Facebook post could even put you in trouble, because by doing that you are actually agreeing to the post in that sense. So it could be interpreted that way by other parties. So be careful. Okay, number 2, let's talk about the evolution of communication. Where did it start? The communication types and process that we now know is entirely different from what communication is used to be. Even before the start of civilization, communication was a vital need for people. A society cannot live on its own without communication, because it is considered as the bloodline of society. So to trace back its development, here are a few highlights as to how communication evolved through time. Now remember those, number 1, we have those cave paintings and stone carvings. It is the most efficient form of communication for man 30,000 years before the Common Era. A pigeon was utilized. I think the spelling here is wrong. Pigeon. It's a P-I-G-I, pigeon. Pigeon is a type of an animal that it's like a dove that was utilized by ancient Greeks to deliver messages in 776 um, BCE. I think it's used in the movie. What do you call this? I like that movie. I forgot the movies of different kingdoms. So like the Vikings even. So Game of Thrones. That's what I have in mind. So they send doves or pigeons to send messages to the other kingdoms. And nowadays we can just simply open our laptops or cell phones and type send, and in a matter of seconds you are sending a message to the other side, to the person on the other side of the globe. But way back then it's quite difficult. It takes days for the message to arrive to a particular recipient. Okay, next we have the marathon man, who was utilized by ancient Greeks, who ran all the way from the marathon to Athens to simply announce the victory of Greek over Persia in the year of 530 BCE. So that's why the marathon still is part of the tradition, part of the Olympics. Okay, the paper came more than 2,000 years later in the first daily newspaper, the Einkommende Zeitung in 1650. So the telegraph was invented in 1840 by Samuel Morse, which has been used for quite a while, for how many hundreds of years, even after that. Hundreds of years, 1840, 1940, yeah, almost 100 years. In 1902, Italian Guglielmo Marconi transmits the first radio signal, and that broke the ice. So this was followed by the transmission of the first television signal by Scottish John Baird, 1927, which started with just action films, no sound, all in black and white. And from there, we invented the black and white uh, movies. Then were able to incorporate sound in it. There came the television. Then the beginning of the new age was in the year 1969. This year was the launch of the ARPANET, or the Advanced Research Projects Agency Network, or the commonly known now as the Internet, which has greatly changed our lives forever. Okay, so the emergence of the World Wide Web came sooner after in 1994, which was most of you were born how many years after that? And in 1997, the instant messaging and internet chat came out. And in 1999, blogging became a hit. Even until today, blogging is writing something and making and having a lot of people in the internet read your articles. Then in 2004, when Harvard student Mark Zuckerberg created Facebook, followed by the launch of Twitter in 2006, and that has evolved nowadays to a lot of things like Zoom, like what I'm using right now, Google Meet. So it made the world smaller. So it's not a problem anymore for families to work in the different parts of the globe, because they can just put an internet a laptop on the table, and as if they are facing the person live. It's just a matter of physical distance, but in terms of communication, they can still connect to each other anytime they want. Okay, so let's talk about the communication process. So this is a guide toward realizing effective communication. So it is through the communication process that the sharing of the common meaning between the sender and the receiver takes place. Individuals that follow the communication process will have the opportunity to become more productive in every aspect of their profession. So effective communication leads to understanding. So you can see here the model of communication by Osgood Scrum. So we have the from the sender. So one good thing about this diagram is that there was no label as to the sender and the receiver, because communication could be a two-way process. So let's presume that this one has started the communication. So he encodes the message into words, sends the message, and the other person decodes it by reading or by listening. And after encoding, he interprets it. Then he also begins the process of encoding, sending the feedback message back to the person. The other person decodes, and so begins the process, the cycle of communication between two persons. So the first step of the sender involves an encoding process. I think that's pretty much it. So another term for okay, to begin transmitting the message, the sender uses some kind of a channel. So we also call it the medium. Plural would be media. That's why we have social media. So the channel is the means used to convey the message. Most channels are either oral or written, but currently visual channels are becoming the more common as technology expands. Lately we have GE20, we call it the visual visual reading. It's now a subject here in UM. It's one of the subjects that we are about to take as well. It just started last summer. So because of the recognition that even visual channels are becoming more common as technology expands. So common channels include telephone in a variety of written forms such as memos, letters, and reports. So the effectiveness of the various channels fluctuates depending on the characteristics of communication. So for example, when immediate feedback is necessary, oral communication channels are more effective because any uncertainties can be cleared up on the spot. So in a situation where the message must be delivered to more than a small group of people, written channels are often more effective, like emails. Although in many cases both oral and written channels should be used because on supplements one supplements the other. So like what we're doing right now, you have a video of me talking, you listen, at the same time you read the text. So somehow that creates a better comprehension and recall of the lesson. So after the appropriate channels are selected, the message enters after the decoding stage of the communication process. So decoding is conducted by the receiver. So once the message is received and examined, the stimulus is sent to the brain for interpreting in order to assign some type of a meaning to it. It is the processing stage that constitutes decoding. So it takes some time to process, then decode it. So the receiver begins to interpret the symbols sent by the sender, translating the messages to their own set of experiences in order to make the symbols meaningful or to make sense of the symbols. Successful communication takes place when the receiver correctly interprets the sender's message. So for example, who among us here are capable of interpreting Morse code? It's quite difficult, right? So unless we have the experience to decode it, we can never understand the message the other person is sending. So the receiver is the individual to whom the message is directed to. So the extent to which the person comprehends the message will depend on a number of factors, which include the following, like how much the individual knows about the topic, their receptivity to the message, and the relationship and trust that exists between the sender and the receiver. So all these interpretations by the receiver are influenced by their experiences, their attitudes, their knowledge, skills, perceptions, and culture. So it is similar to the sender's relationship with encoding. So we cannot just make a joke with somebody who we are not really that close with. So that involves the level of relationships that we have as persons. So there's a level of respect between communications, on communications between the boss and the subordinate. So those are some examples that where relationship and trust is part of the communication process. Feedback is the final link in the chain of the communication process. So after receiving the message, the receiver responds in some ways and signals the response to the sender. So the signal may take in the form of a spoken comment, a long sigh, a written message, a smile even, or some other actions. So even the lack of response in a sense is a form of response. So without feedback, the sender cannot confirm that the receiver has interpreted the message correctly. So sometimes a simple thumbs up icon in a message is sometimes that important. For example, you are asking the person if they will pursue with a plan to go on a party. And unless the person confirms on the other end of the line, you would have doubts if it will push through. So that's how important feedback is. What else? Feedback is a key component in the communication process because it allows the sender to evaluate the effectiveness of the message. So feedback ultimately provides an opportunity for the sender to take corrective action to clarify a misunderstood message. So feedback plays an important role by indicating significant communication barriers like differences, background, different interpretation of words, and differing emotional reactions. So the communication process is the perfect guide toward achieving effective communication. So when followed properly, the process can usually assure that the sender's message will be understood by the receiver. So although the communication process seems simple, it is not. Certain barriers present themselves throughout the process. So those barriers are factors that have a negative impact on the communication process. So some common barriers include the use of inappropriate medium or channel. So sometimes it is best that messages be written or spoken. We also have incorrect grammar, even a mistake in punctuation could be uh, damaging. What else? Inflammatory words or words that conflict with their body language. How do you say sorry, for example, to a person? Do you do it smiling? Of course, they have to see some kind of a remorse in your words and your actions when you say the words. What else? Some jargons and many more. So noise is also another common barrier between people. Noise can occur during any stage of the communication process. So noise is anything that distorts a message by interfering with the common communication process. And it can take many forms, including, for example, a radio playing in the background. I don't know if this music helps you be awake or set the mood, but if it distracts you from listening to me, then might as well take it off. You tell me. But if you find it helpful to be there, we'll keep it that way. Okay, so it could be another person trying to enter the conversation or any other distractions that prevent the receiver from paying attention. Okay, I remember a t-shirt saying, I hate it when other people distracts me when I am interfering. So he's the one interfering in the conversation. Okay, so we're almost done. Okay, so the elements of communication, elements of process will not be possible with the portrayal of the individual roles of each of the elements of communication. So remember, we have the sender, which is the individual or group who initiates the conversation. We also have the receiver, which is to whom the message is directed to. We have the channel, this is the medium or the means which the sender uses in sending the desired message. Then encoding is the process by which the message is translated into the form of symbols that represent ideas or concepts. Then finally we have, oh no, we still have decoding. This is the part where the receiver interprets and analyzes the meaning of the symbols sent by the sender. Then we have the feedback going down. Aside from being the reply or the response, feedback is also a great way of evaluating the effectiveness of the communication process. So the communication process is effective if there is a correct feedback, like in a job interview. You have to really have a good feedback uh, with the other person on the other side of the table. Either whether you are the one being interviewed or you are the one interviewing the person. And finally, we have the message, which is the heart and soul of the communication process. So the message corresponds to the symbols, the ideas that are transferred from the sender to the receiver. And the underlying goal is to have a common and shared understanding of this message. Okay, so I hope this lesson would help you understand and answer the activities that I gave. So for the new subject, I hope you can finish this by Monday or Tuesday. But for the rest, the deadline is tonight at 7 p.m. Okay, so see you again probably tomorrow to discuss these questions, and we can proceed to the next ULO. Okay, so bye bye and God bless.